All right, and we're back. So now we're going to go into a more detailed look at Autodesk Mudbox 2012. So again, this week we've been announcing all the new releases for our products, and there is a ton of new stuff inside of Mudbox, which Craig will have the time to show probably about half of in the next 25 minutes. So Craig, don't let me slow you down.
Thank you, Sean. Yeah, we're going to take a look at some of the new features available in Mudbox 2012. It's a pretty big release. The first thing I should point out is that we have some massive performance improvements that allow you to sculpt at much higher resolutions faster, arrange your sculpt layers, your paint layers faster, and paint very large texture data sets and handle that much faster. It's much more powerful workflow in there. The other important thing to note is that Mudbox 2012 is now ported to the 64-bit Linux operating system, so that's good news for Linux users out there. So the first thing we're going to take a look at is some texture painting here within Mudbox 2012. Mudbox 2012 has a couple of interesting ways to handle UV workflows. So the previous way that we were able to work with UVs within Mudbox is that if we had something like this here, a really screwed up UV layout, it's a little over-exaggerated here, it's quite messy, we got these overlapping UVs, we could always have the ability to take another model and import UVs into that. We've been able to do that for some time now in Mudbox, but now we have a couple of other options that we can work with here. So we now provide the ability to just start with, under the mesh menu, creating UVs in Mudbox. The idea behind this is to not wait for a modeler down the line to bring you another mesh that you can import UVs on, but rather to get you texture painting. Because we now have the ability to transfer maps completely, baking them over, and also transferring all of your paint layers to a completely arbitrary mesh within Mudbox too. So very nice for a painting workflow. So I'm just going to go in here and select the model. You can see that we have this nice little hotbox available, much like Maya users would be familiar with. If I hit the space bar, it'll bring up these little icons, and if I right-click on any of them, it'll give me those settings to those specific areas: sculpting, painting, the UI, as well as brush strength and size. And you can access pretty much everything in here. All of this is customizable through an XML file within the Mudbox 2012 directory as well. So on the model, I'm going to select my model here, and I'm just going to jump into the mesh, create UVs. It's going to ask me if I really want to replace those UVs. Yep. And then it's going to ask me how many tiles I want to do. So I could lay out unlimited tiles right across for this mesh here. I'm just going to leave it as a default 1 for now. If I go in here, what it's doing is it's just giving me this simple little layout of all the faces here within my tile. And the difference is that now it's giving me the ability to just start with my texture painting, so that we can just start painting on this right now and not have to worry about that UV layout in there. Another thing that we have that's a big deal within the texture painting world, in the Subscription Advantage Pack with Mudbox 2011, we announced the ability to handle Ptex. We now have Ptex fully implemented into Mudbox, so you can implement that into your texture painting workflow, which is a completely UV-less workflow. So we have some UVs on this thing. I'm going to select this model. Under the mesh menu, I can actually go to Ptex Setup, and what I'm going to do is, let's see if we have some paint layers on this guy here. I just have an empty paint layer on there. I'm just going to get rid of that. I can actually bake over. If I had a bunch of textures on here, I can bake those into a Ptex format as well. But in here, I'm going to go to my Ptex Setup, and what it's going to do when you first launch it for the first time, you're going to get this little help menu, and it's very simple. It's just going to tell you to zoom in to work with the resolution that you want to make, you want to work with for your Ptex painting here. So if I start to zoom in on this mesh here, it's telling me that right now the current resolution that it's going to set this at is at about 1 million texels. So those are texture elements spaced out uniformly across the mesh, based off of the mesh's subdivision or its overall geometry resolution there as well. So I can do a couple of things here. If I zoom in, you'll see that these little grid marks, these little kind of squares, are giving me an indication of the resolution we're going to work with. So I can decrease that, and you see that we have this really kind of low res here, about 24,000 texels across everything, which works out to about a 1K by 1K texture per face. If I jump up into here, you see the resolution's getting a little tighter, and I'm working with about 4.9K, about 5K texture by 5K per face, right? So it's actually giving me a nice high resolution, and I can keep driving that up. So in the top corner now, I'm working with 40K by 40K per face on that object. So I'm not going to do that. It's going to get a little crazy here to perform that live with a 40K by 40K right across every single face of the model. Let's just use something like the default here so we can paint out around this area here for now. 1.2K by 1.2K per face, which is still a really nice resolution. And I'm just going to deselect the model and let's see what kind of workflow we can get with the painting there. If I grab this simple rust map and just drive in a new paint layer, one of the things you'll notice that everything is the exact same workflow. All the tools work the same. Nothing has changed at all. Paint layers are the same. All the tools that are available, all the new things that are available in 2012 as well, layer masks, things like that, are all the same. The only difference you're going to see is the file format. So we're working with Ptex files here, 8-bit all the way up to 32-bit floating point RGBA. So if I leave this at an 8-bit for now, it'll drop down a new paint layer there. I'm just working with the diffuse channel, and I can start to paint in this overall detail from this space out in here. And it's going to give me actually some really nice resolution from there. But we can do actually a couple of other really interesting things in here as well. So while we're painting with this at this texel resolution, if you will, what it'll allow us to do is change the resolution on the fly, something that's not you're not really capable of doing with a UV layout. You can certainly add different resolution of paint layers to it, but you're stuck with that UV layout on your model. With Ptex, I can jump into my face selection tool, and you'll notice that we've added a couple different ways to select. We've always had the paintbrush option, a lasso we now have added, and we've added a rectangular marquee in there. So let's just grab some faces here. If I put wireframe on this object here, I'm at my base level, and I can just start grabbing some of these faces rather quickly in here. We'll just select those, and then if I go back to my Ptex setup, it's going to preserve what I've painted on there at that resolution. So we're working with about a 1.2K by 1.2K per face texel resolution on there. And I can start to increase this and decrease that specific area. So the nice thing about this, if this is an area that we're not going to see that much, I can start to drive that right down and decrease it to a really low resolution on there. And I can also increase that up to a really high level as well. So I've got that decrease now. Let's increase it a little bit higher than we used on there. So we'll bring this in, maybe get it a little bit sharper than that. We'll bring this into around 3K by 3K for that existing area that I've selected. And you'll see these different color tiles in here. That's the level of detail system that we have for texture painting within Mudbox. It'll cull out all the rest of the areas that you're not working with specifically to help save any video memory on depending on your hardware setup that you might have. So we'll deselect those faces in there. And a couple of interesting things to note. When working with Ptex, it's actually almost like the opposite thinking of working with UVs. With Ptex format, I've upped the resolution of what I've painted here. This was painted at 1.2K by 1.2K, and you can see now we have this kind of very pixelated look. It's actually doing what it should be doing because it's taken that lower resolution texture I've painted and it's stretched it up now to a much higher resolution area in there. So we can start to paint with this. Let's just go to back to our paint tool. And we can now get a much tighter resolution within that area that I've increased there. So you can see that we can start to get a nice, more tight resolution on there. And you can see that we can get some really nice results with Ptex there. Very clean, very sharp kind of overall effect on that as well. So we're going to move on to some other different things here with some paint layers that we can do within our paint layer workflow. I'm just going to actually hide, or actually let's just show all. And then with the hotkeys here, I'm just going to hide some of these objects out of here. So we have this vehicle, and I'm just going to quickly, using the H hotkey, I'm just hiding objects away. So we'll just work with this body of this vehicle here. And a couple things that we can do now in Mudbox 2012, you'll notice that the layers, the channels, we have them so you can quickly organize them. They look a little bit different now. It's faster to import and drag layers back and forth between channels. It actually works much faster and seamlessly now as well. Let's just add a new layer onto this guy. We'll work at 2K. And we have a couple things that we can do in Mudbox 2012 for texture painting that we couldn't do at all before, and that is the ability to create stencils. So I have in my image browser a bunch of different images in here that I can work with, and just to show that we can quickly grab images from other sources. If you're in Photoshop or Sketchbook or another painting application in there, I'm in a browser in here, I can just quickly copy that to the clipboard, and then within Mudbox, if I wanted to use that image that I just quickly grabbed from a texture website or something, I can go to my Create Stencil menu here, and I can use the image from the clipboard. I can set whatever resolution I want, start painting from nothing and build my own stencils in there, but I'm going to use that image I just grabbed from a web browser. And we also have a tiling feature now, so you can create tiled textures on the fly within Mudbox. The little menu is going to give you 3 preview options here. So I can display kind of a grayscale, semi-transparent view of this. I can go into color transparent, and then I can just do the full version here. So let's do that. And with my stencil hotkeys here, I'm just going to zoom in and out here. What it's giving me that I've selected tiling on here, the middle texture here, the middle square in up here is what I'm working with. And it's going to give me the rest of these kind of an offset to show me how the tiling is working out on there. So I'll just grab some of the paint tools in here. We can use all of the paint tools with this here. I can add other texture stencils in there. I can use existing tools. So if I take the clone brush here, and we'll just work with that. And you can see it drops in an editable stencil layer in my, my channels there. And I can start to use something like the clone brush tool here, for example, and just control click that area. And you'll see that it's giving me that feedback, if I zoom out of here a little bit, to show how our tiling is coming as I paint here, so that we can really quickly start to paint in. I'm just going to do this really quick here and just get rid of the seams on that. And we can start to paint in some different things. I can use all the other tools here as well. I can use the saturation. I can quickly desaturate, or I can actually increase the saturation on that area as well. So maybe we'll increase some of this for our tileable map. I can blur things out as well. I can use dodge and burn really quickly in here if I wanted to. Let's maybe burn in that area a little bit. So anyways, there's a tileable texture that we'll work with for now on here. And then what I can do is I can save that to the tray. I can save it out so I can come back to it for another project, or I can just hit done and start working with that. So we'll do that. If I go to my projection brush now, we now have a tileable texture that we can work with on our vehicle here. So we'll start to paint this in. It's important to note what else is going on in here. We've always had the ability to paint over several different objects within Mudbox, but previously you had to combine all of those in Maya or Max and bring it over and have them all combined together. Well, if I go into the object list, this vehicle is comprised of several dozen, bunch of different objects in there, all these different little pieces. So we don't have to combine them anymore. With a single stroke, we can paint right across all these different objects at the exact same time. So very quick and easy to work with multiple objects. And then the nice thing, of course, is I can go in and I can start to hide out some of these objects. So I can work underneath that cannon area there if I wanted to paint some more in there. And now with this texture, let's go back to our paint layers. We start doing a couple things in here. If you right-click on the menu or grab the layer menu up there, you'll see we have an adjust color window that pops up now. And we can do a bunch of different things with this. We can adjust the overall hue and saturation on the fly of our texture layers. This will work with any channel at all, and start to adjust the overall values. And then we have these curves down here, so we can work with red, green, blue, or the value and saturation with our curves as well. And we can insert points on there. We can customize that to whatever we might want it to be. Let's just leave it at something like that is fine for now. And what else we can do on the paint layers is we now have the ability to take advantage of layer masks. So I can create a layer mask on any paint layer on absolutely any channel. I can paint normal maps and put a layer mask down there if I wanted to as well. So we're going to take this layer mask, and in my image browser, I'm going to use this simple little stripe pattern here. If I bring that back, I'm going to turn tiling off on that so we can just see what we're working with. And if I work with this here, you'll see that I can start to mask out areas based off of that stencil that I'm working with. So I'm just masking out some of these areas in here. And let's maybe just move that into that place there. And just quickly mask that out. And then what we can do as well is it's unlimited layer mask. Just like it's unlimited paint layers, I can create a whole new paint layer. So let's do that. Let's grab another layer mask in there and go to the image browser and grab something different. I just have this simple little gradient mask that I'm working with. I'm going to drive that into a stencil as well. We'll set this up overall on the vehicle here. And then what I can start to do is paint this. And you'll notice the first thing you'll notice is it's actually overriding or replacing what I just did on that other layer. And that's because we have the full ability to blend layer masks just like we do paint layers. So you can see I'm getting this gradient. I'm getting it fading out at the front and at the back here. And we'll get out of there, and we can take advantage of all the blending modes that we can use for all of our paint layers in any channel, just like we can the same way we can use them on layer masks here. So I can start to do things like maybe overlay that, or I can maybe multiply between the two so I can get the blend of the two masks together. So it's pretty powerful, and of course you can work on the opacity of those layer masks to affect your overall texture. So this effectively allows you to have a completely non-destructive texture painting workflow. Preserve what you've painted, add layer masks, and make your changes there without having to erase or delete anything in there. And the other important thing to note is I was in the blend layers there. We now have all the blend layers, all 27 of them here that match right over with Photoshop. So we have the exact same blend layers that are available in Photoshop CS5 as of currently right now, and that increases the workflow back to Photoshop. So if you want to use the power of the tools in Photoshop, you can certainly do that even easier now. We have the ability to export per channel to PSD, and it'll save all your paint layers, write that over to Photoshop, as well as importing a channel from PSD. The export of the channel will bring a kind of a mesh wireframe or a wireframe view of your UV space for you, just for visual purposes in Photoshop as well. So you can paint and just keep that live update into Mudbox. Let's look at a couple of other things that we can do here. So if I take this side view on this mesh, on this model here, create a new paint layer, and we saw we can create a stencil from scratch or even from another source by copying an image from a browser or Photoshop or anything like that. But we can also do editable stencils, and this is really cool. It gives us the advantage now of essentially deforming or warping our textures live in the view. So I have a couple splatter maps in here. Let's maybe grab this map in here. Let's see what we have that's kind of a cool map. That'll do. We'll just bring that into the stencils. So if I bring this little splatter map that I can work with and start painting some splatter across the side of this vehicle here, I'm no longer confined to the shape of the stencil. I don't need to drive this into another application and start painting the shape of it that I want in a different resolution. I can use this resolution and I can deform the shape of this stencil here. So we're going to do that. If I go underneath the Edit menu and I jump into Edit Stencil, you'll see we got the exact same menu up here that we had with the creation of the stencils there. I can view it in a transparent gray view, or I can go right up to full color and it'll put it on a nice opaque background for me on there. So let's work with this on the opaque background so we can just see what's going on here a little bit easier. And what I'm going to do is I'm just using the same tools that we normally work with the stencil. I can line it up with my S hotkey. And again, I can use any of the painting tools in here to edit this as well. I can actually use the sculpt tool. So this is really cool. I can grab my grab brush here, for example, just maybe adjust the fall off on that. And let's zoom this out a bit here. And then what I can do is on the fly, I can start to warp that texture. So we can start to do things like maybe grab this to kind of flare it out a bit so that we have it kind of taper off at the front. And you'll notice that I'm working, if I put the wireframe on, we'll see the wireframe on the stencil. And the reason why we've implemented that is that we can actually subdivide the stencil. So it gives you more power to warp or edit that stencil. So there I'm subdividing it. We put the wireframe on, we can work with that. So I get a much smoother fall off there when I start to warp my stencil on there. So a couple of the other tools that are pretty cool to work with this are things like the pinch brush, right? We can grab that and I can start to pinch in areas, or if I use the inverse of it by hitting the control key, I can open up areas on that stencil as well. So let's just taper this down a little bit here really quickly, and we can start to kind of flare out that overall stencil. That's fine. And then we can hit, again, save it to the tray. I'm just going to hit done on here, and I can start to work with that back in my paint tool. So if I use the projection now, I'm now working with that altered stencil on there. So let's do that. We'll go into here, and we'll just project that on. We'll just position this here a little bit better. We'll maybe get it going this way so it's coming off the wheels a bit in there and blasting that splatter across. And you see, of course, Mudbox has always had the nice ability to handle alpha on the fly with whatever image format you're using in there. So I'm just quickly putting that on to blend it in there. And of course, speaking of blending, I can do that. I can bring down the opacity of that. And again, I can start to do things like multiply or overlay that, or even divide, all of the things that Photoshop can do really easily into there. So maybe let's just leave it as a multiplied stencil on there. So we took a look at some of the enhancements to the paint layer tools here. One other thing that we can do with that stencil, I've placed that on and now I'm viewing that over top of all my other textures. It'd be nice to view that independent of all the other textures. We've had that, been asked by many texture artists for that. Well, we put that in there finally to make the masses happy. So if we hit solo selected, it's just going to solo that specific layer. We've also added the ability to solo as diffuse. So if you're painting a normal map in a normal channel, you can hit solo as diffuse and it'll actually show you what the normal map is looking like at a diffuse presentation there. So if I hit shift, click on that little yellow ball, it's going to bring back the display of everything that I was working with there as well. So we want to work with one more quick thing to show here. I'll just show everything. We'll bring all the models in, and then I'm actually just going to isolate a model. So we now have that with the hotbox here. I can just isolate a certain model in there. And I want to work with this little sculpt freeze wheel here. Let's get rid of these guys. So we'll just bring this one in here. And what we can do now, this is kind of an interesting thing. We've always had the ability to use the freeze brush within the sculpt tray where I can just grab on here and, whoops, and just start to freeze geometry based off of that. Blue representing the areas I'm freezing so that it won't be affected by sculpting. But we now have something really cool that we can do based off of sculpt layers or texture layers here. So if I jump into the paint layers here and we'll grab a whole new paint layer on this guy. Oops, just deselect that. We'll grab a new paint layer on there. What I can do now is bring in textures, or I can paint textures, of course, in here, and I can actually use that as a template for sculpting. So we'll just show something really quick with this here. I'll step down to the base level on this guy just so we can see it a little bit easier. And then what I can do is display this. I'm just going to display this here in my, let's go into, there we go. We'll just bring it into UV space on there. So I'm now effectively working with the way the UVs are laid out on this object in here. And if I jump to my image browser, let's grab a simple little stencil here. We have this really simple little tire tread type thing. And we'll grab that and we'll rotate that around and bring it in. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit on this here. We'll bring this in a bit and line it up. I'm going to turn the tiles on there on that. And then I'm just going to quickly, using my projection or paintbrush, it doesn't matter, I'm just going to quickly rub that across the tire tread on this wheel. So no big deal, right? I'm not really doing anything too crazy with that. We're able to quickly wrap that around based off painting in UV space. But we can now do something really cool. In the menu here, if I right-click or grab the menu, we have freeze from selected. So we can do this with paint layers, we can do this with sculpt layers. This is really powerful, actually. We can sculpt details and then freeze those details or invert the freezing of that and flood sculpting detail across the surface. So I'm going to freeze from selected on this here. And if we, whoop, let's grab the, let me just undo that there. Grab my paint layer, turn it on, and freeze from selected on there. I'm not sure why it's not. Not sure why it's not bringing that over on there for me. Let me just step it up a couple levels. Bring it over to a high layer here, and there we go. So it's actually taking a moment here. I'm working at about 1.6 million polys there, and it's going to freeze the rest of the geometry there. Where it's white, it's not going to freeze. If I turn that texture off, you'll see that that area is empty. I can quickly hit Shift-I to invert that, but I want to work with this specific area here. So this is kind of interesting. We've always had in these sculpting tools here a magical little button here called Flood. A lot of people weren't really aware of it or didn't really play with it or use it. This is the type of thing that you'd want to use with Flood, or there's many other things you can do, but this is actually kind of nice. So I just have the strength down to 1. If I hit Flood on that, it's not going to affect any of the blue frozen areas. It's just going to affect the unfrozen areas on there. And then, of course, with the strength, we always have the ability to blend down, but we can also blend up there as well, right? So let's do that. Let's bring this up to higher level here. So pretty simple little workflow, but something that was previously unavailable in Mudbox, or not as quick to do in Mudbox until this version here as well. So I'm just going to quickly unfreeze that mesh, and then I'm just going to show something that's actually kind of cool that we've added to the grab brush here. So if you look at the tools in the sculpt tray and you jump into the grab brush, we've added 2 little settings on here. Grab silhouette and follow path. And what grab silhouette is going to allow us to do, if I just change my view in here, I'm going to switch view to, let's go to a side view, that's fine. If I use the grab brush and just start to work with this here based off of my view, it's only going to distort the vertex or the vertices that are facing my angle of view here. But if I hit grab silhouette, it's not mirroring it through, it's passing this right through. Another little tip here, a lot of people think that the grab brush is something that works like the other brush is just on geometry. I can certainly start to grab things on the geometry, but I can work with the grab tool in space. So if I click down and push in, it's actually going to affect that area based off of the space. Now, nothing too big happening there, but let's change the fall off on this, maybe make it a little bit harder on there, and then just push that in based off the space. You'll see we're getting these nice clean hard lines along that edge. And if we switch our view back to our perspective view, you see now that it's going right through. So it's passing that sculpting right through across rather than just kind of a distorted based off per view. Another thing that we have is this little follow path. I'll just show that really quickly here. If I go to my sculpt or my grab tool here, And let's just drop down a new sculpt layer on that. And what I can do with the grab or follow path is it allows us to do some interesting little sculpting effects in here. So if I grab this guy here and I just start to, let's make a bigger brush, and I start to pull these things, it'll actually follow the direction that I'm sculpting in there. So we can do a couple of interesting little effects on there. The slower I move, the more accurate it's going to be in the following of my direction of my sculpting on there. So we can start to do some interesting little effects with that. It's kind of nice. It gives this kind of build-off or build-out effect that you're working with there. So I don't know what I'm making right now, but a mess?
We're all wondering.
Yes, but anyways, thanks, Sean.
You went from tire to some sort of jellyfish.
Yeah, some sort of sun-like tire. Anyway, so some cool little enhancements to that tool that are fun to play with. That's actually, I'm going to end it there. I actually cover the one-click workflow in the Maya Suites thing. I'm not sure if I'm doing that again today, but I think tomorrow. So come by and see that, where you can actually do a retopo modeling workflow between Mudbox and Maya live with the modeling tools in Maya, which is really cool. So thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Craig.